This is a production of Cornell University.
Yeah, this was a picture taken by my other travel colleague, Chase Scrubus, our state park agronomist. Ming-Yi Chou came with us as well on this little trip. And here we are walking at Maidstone. For those that don't know, Ming-Yi is the assistant extension specialist in turfgrass pathology at Rutgers University. Taking over for Bruce Clark. And many of you know him from the field days. I know him, of course, from Cornell days. And that's a whole nother story that we'll save for another day. But Carl, we were out. It was our East End trip, which you and I took many years ago. And in light of all the moisture and the Ryder Cup coming to that little venue down on Long Island, they were at it. They are spending money identifying areas where just to get the water off the surface, those kinds of things that money and resources can buy. And when you know what you're doing, you can target this and invest appropriately. And Ming-Yi, Chase, and I got to walk around. And then, of course, the great Sunken Meadow State Park, one of the great glories of being a citizen of the state of New York. You got to dodge golf balls out there. These 6, 7 guys managing 27 holes. To think, working in play a lot. It's tough to get stuff done. Just a real factory. 90,000 rounds last year, 18,000 already this year. They're on their way to another record year. And then, of course, our longtime friend Charlie Redlinger and the other 6 guys that run the great Montauk Downs State Park. What a glorious facility. And Charlie, has it ready. But I can tell you, and Ming-Yi saw this too, Carl. I was in Buffalo last week, and I can tell you that they were further ahead than they are on the East End of Long Island. Okay. And I think that's a real indication of the strength that the ocean, that big body of water there, puts on the cooling of the whole thing, right? I mean, here we've got air-fied greens that are very slow to recover, and in Buffalo, boom, they're already recovered. Now, some of it's a little bit dry. Charlie's been a little bit dry as well, but just a lovely facility there. I got to see Sandra Voltaggio, our diagnostician at CCE Suffolk County, and she got to meet Ming-Yi and Chase, and she's met Chase before. Big contributor to our shortcut conference call every week. Then out to the vineyard. We left Ming-Yi, and then we headed out to the Martha's Vineyard and the Vineyard Golf Club. Kevin Banks, George, and the crew out there. I actually got to see good old Jeff Carlson. He's the head fairway mower team manager for the 30-something acres of fairways that Kevin Banks is managing with significantly fewer synthetic chemicals. Actually, the one thing you can say is they've never sprayed a synthetic herbicide out there to this day, and weeds remain a problem. And we ended the week, Carl, at the Titleist facility, the Manchester Road testing facility for Titleist, where we were able to do some of our FootJoy golf footwear testing and tour the facility a little bit with the engineers. And John Swigert, our shoe engineer at FootJoy, has that Bay 3 all outfitted as a biomechanics lab now. We are in the biomechanics business here on the East Coast, testing shoes for golf performance as well as greens friendliness. Okay, it was warm along the coast and a little cooler by the lakes, but if you look at the departure from normal to the south and along the coast is about a week, 10 days to 2 weeks ahead. So you definitely see certain things ahead of normal, right? This is the 30-year average. And then as you go inland and towards the lakes and towards the north, you get more at normal or slightly behind. But nobody's really lagging significantly behind normal. Almost everybody is ahead of normal. Now, of course, the story's been rainfall. And if you're in the Hudson Valley, the Pioneer Valley, the Massachusetts, Vermont, Maine border, you're getting 4 to 6 inches of rain on a regular basis. And it looks like that rain's going to continue. I didn't entirely understand this, but there is a weather pattern we are stuck in now that causes the rain just to keep swirl over the ocean, grab it, and seem to dump it in this place all the time on the way down to central Pennsylvania and down into the panhandle of Maryland, down into Virginia. So there's a number of wet areas that are going to stay wet, and it looks like the pattern's going to keep up, which means, and Ming-Yi, this is where we can start to chat a little bit. You've got some background in the dollar spot area. This is not the Smith-Kearns model, just full disclosure. This is the model that we adapted from Nikki Rothwell and many years ago working with Gail Schumann, that we adapted based on some diagnostic data, published a paper on years ago. And I don't know, Carl, does it track Smith-Kearns pretty good?
Uh, in the middle of the season, it does, and at the edges, it's a little different. I think in past years we've seen it pick up the fall spike in dollar spot a little bit more in the Smith Kearns, and maybe in the spring not so much. But yeah, this is a sort of estimating the hours of leaf wetness, right? And that's the one thing that the Smith Kearns is looking at humidity, and we're sort of making all based on precip and humidity. How many hours is the leaf wet?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the biggest sort of difference
So,
there.
but Ming-Yi, what we have sort of figured out is the slope of the line matters, right? And it looks like the forecast is indicating an up and down thing. So I'll put you right on the spot out of the gate here. You're the golf course superintendent looking at this, staring at a 30-acre application of a fungicide with the risk that, you're seeing here. It goes up, it flattens, it goes down. What are you thinking about?
Yeah, so for the Smith curve model, I think it's great. And one of the improvement we've been seeing for the past multiple years since it was released in 2018 was the shorter seasons, right? So the shorter seasons, a lot of time we'll see spike up in the early spring, and we don't really know if we want to believe it, because usually you see the spike up, we don't see any activity. And then late in the fall, it's just the same. All right, so sometimes it spikes up, so you don't see visual symptoms or visual activities, but there might be a biological activities that it would be beneficial if you do it preventive. So I think it's really interesting that maybe this model will be a better indicator for the shorter seasons. Yeah, I don't really know. I have no experience with this one. Work a little bit more on the Smith Kearns.
Yeah. So, I'm wondering, the first thing that comes to my mind is you guys are telling me there's microdochium patch here in central New York, and we certainly saw some when we were down in the metro area. I'm not a pathologist, right? I just play one on this show. And what I can tell you is when the leaves are wet for a really long time, all it is modulated by temperature. You keep turfgrass leaves wet for a really long time and it's cool, you're going to get microdochium. A little bit warmer, you get dollar spot. A little bit warmer, you get brown patch. A little bit warmer, you get pythium. I'm sure there are other factors, but that's a fairly simple way to look at it, isn't it, Ming-Yi?
Yeah, it is. And dollar spot is so interesting because, it likes humidity, likes relatively wet foliar, but it likes dry soil.
Yes.
Right. So if there is an effective way that you can model the leaf wetness and that doesn't really necessarily come from like a pouring rain, then I think it would be more accurate in then predicting the disease activity better.
Very good. Okay. Well, if you look at since in the last month, there's, as we've said, some regions of the state that are 200% of normal precipitation. But as you go to the South Jersey and Delmarva, Philly, you get a little bit drier. Although I was watching that Truist Championship at Philadelphia Cricket last week, that didn't look very dry. They were struggling with some rainfall down there as well. But Carl, as you know, when it starts to get wet, we get a little nervous about, again, applications in the spring. And in a couple of days, the model's indicating we're starting to ramp up a little bit. And you can see that red vein in that area where the heavy rain's going to come. So I'd be really careful in the upper Hudson Valley, lower Capital Region, into Massachusetts, making applications at that time, especially on sloped areas. So now we're going to get into the conversation because, in many places, water's not limiting, right? And we're waiting for temperature to get to a certain trigger for root pathogens, which is, everybody will know now, is the topic of conversation. And we're starting to warm, right? We're well into the upper 50s and 60s. And you look at, and this is an old screenshot from the PPA one that Paul Vincelli started, and a bunch of guys, I'm sure you included now, Ming-Yi, are putting together every year, looking at efficacy data of fungicides, giving some background on what we've learned about the pathogen. It's sort of a mashup between a chemical recommendation and a compendium. You guys talk a little bit about the organism. This is, a must publication for every turfgrass manager. And in there are 2 soil pathogens. In this case, I just grabbed Summer Patch and Fairy Ring, that have different soil temperatures for when you apply them, right? And so, this means, right, Ming-Yi, that this is when infection begins with these organisms. Let's confirm some basic stuff. These soil temperature triggers are for when you expect the organism to begin to grow and potentially infect the plant. Yes?
Yeah, yes, that's correct. I think these are suggested recommended spray temperature, right? So I would assume, and we've seen this in the play in laboratory, they can actually grow at a lower temperature, but we want to hit them when they're at their kind of entering their peak activity, right? So once they enter their peak activity, they will colonize the root very quickly. So that's when actually you can hit them with a fungicide. That's when they will actually take in all those active ingredients very quickly and then kill the cells.
Okay. All right. Very good. The perfect setup. So now, years ago, and I still do it, look at what Lee Butler puts out from the North Carolina State University that runs a diagnostic lab down there. And he looks at when, he goes back and he does a report on how his samples came in. So this is back in 2022. The bent POA submissions and the 14-year average. In 2022, overall, a lot of samples came in a little bit later. The peak of sample submission was a little later for bent POA, right? Which means, it was hotter later, right? Or the heat persisted later. When you look at when he gets his summer patch samples from these bent POA surfaces, and presumably a lot of these are definitely from the Delmarva and south of us here in the Northeast, but you would say it maybe just shift a little bit with when we get it. But you'll see summer patch samples coming all the way into October down in North Carolina. And if you look up, you also see take-all samples coming in the spring and also in the fall. This is just when the samples come in. Now, just to add some intrigue to it, this is a picture from many years ago. Todd Lode found a golf course superintendent that did a phrase mowing, and in where they phrase mowed, they got take-all patch, right? They don't call it take-all patch, they call it take-all root rot, TARR, yes? Yeah, TARR. So you get that weird thing where you really cut it low and you get more. And then John Inguigiato, many years ago, looked at mowing height effects and aerification effects on summer patch and found more summer patch at the lower mowing height. So there's a little bit of a mowing height effect, might be related to roots. And he looked at coring and manganese sulfate applications, right? And so, you see when you don't apply manganese, you get some summer patch. In this case, I think this was take-all patch. You get some take-all patch. And when you hollow tine and don't put manganese, it looks pretty good, but everything else sort of doesn't look as good. As soon as you put manganese in there, the samples get better. There was an indication that a May solid tining made the summer patch worse when you didn't put the manganese sulfate down. A lot of guys aerifying at this time of year. So that's always something that's stood in the back of my mind, Ming-Yi. But Carl, I want to give you a chance because I grabbed some of your slides, right? Here is this concept that you described called the war of attrition, right? Mm-hmm. And you put this slide together. You want to talk about it for a second?
Yeah, so the idea, and I think this is when we had Rich Buckley on maybe a year, maybe even 2 years ago, this idea that most of your root growth is happening before we're getting to this peak root pathogen activity time frame, right? So if you can build up all of these roots early, and I took some stuff from I don't know if this is James Beard's book, and it's like, okay, if I can grow these roots in April and early part of May, and I know I'm going to have these pathogens in the soil at some point later May into June, let me just build as much as I can because I know I'm going to lose some. And that's one thing Rich Buckley says is even if you put down the fungicide, you're going to lose some amount of root mass and depth. Can I build it up enough and can I focus on that root growth environment? And that's what I'm noticing with some of those slides there, Frank. When I phrase mow, wow, I've taken a lot of organic matter out, right? I don't have much root material left. That's probably why it likes to infect. There's a lot of pathogens there, not many roots. Supply and demand sort of works itself out. Lower mowing heights, we know the roots get shallower, less rooting mass. Again, supply and demand. So I'm looking at some of those things. Hollow tine will decompact, maybe make more room for root growth than a solid tine or nothing. Maybe that's why John's seeing that. So Ming-Yi, does this sort of make sense to you? When I know we're going to get to fungicides here in a bit, but just from like a cultural practice perspective, man, should we just be growing roots and sort of building in? We're going to lose some of that. Just grow as much as you can early.
I totally agree. I mean, that the plant health is usually it's always your first line of defense, right? So if you can grow in more root and you can find a better balance between your foliar and your root system. We know that plants are magical because they can balance out their above ground and below ground growth. So especially during the peak of the root growth activity, if you really stress out the plant and removing a lot of those foliar source, like you said, then it will reduce the root growth. So and you really want to build up your root. You want to have the young root, the in the concurrent year that they will be the main support for water and nutrition for the year. So
Okay.
That is really important.
Yeah. And so water is the next topic, Carl. I'm going to set you up a little bit more here, right? Because rooting depth matters, right? But if let's say you put all this effort into growing deep roots, right? And then you want to protect those roots and you got to put water on to push the fungicide down into the profile. And so this is some work that Jim Kearns and I thought it was Jim Kearns did. Maybe Hutchins did it in 2017 at NC State. This is just a simple snapshot of two replications of the fungicide recovered at different depths when you water into a USGA profile. Okay, so let's remind everybody we're talking about a sand-based system, right? That should drain very well, right? If you put an eighth of an inch of water, only an eighth of an inch of water, you'll be lucky if 30% of that material gets an inch down, right? An inch down. So that means whatever roots you grew, now you're sort of sacrificing them to below an inch because you didn't get the fungicide there. To get it down to the 2 to 3, 3 to 4 inch, at least this data seems to indicate you need about an inch of water. Now, here's what we know. No one does that. No one does that. Maybe they put wetting agents, and we could get into getting the fungicide down there. But Carl, sometimes you actually have topographical issues as well. So I'll pass this to you now for the next couple of slides.
Yeah, so one of the first thing, I think you've seen these bunker banks. We've struggled with these for a couple of years. And I got for those watching, there's some red areas where you can see the root disease. And this is a newer, or I guess an older root disease that we've sort of rediscovered here at this property. But the red areas where you can see that infecting, and then the green areas that's west facing, it's not as south facing as the red areas. That looks perfectly fine. So I guess the first question is, Frank, you talked about a little bit early on, are triggers for making these applications. Soil temps 55 degrees for a couple days. Is there any reason, Ming-Yi, I would want to treat areas that get warmer quicker first compared to these green areas? Or should I just treat everything as soon as my warmest areas get to that soil trigger? Is there a reason I would want to do one or the other there?
Yeah, so I would target the most stressful area, like the warmest area. Like I said earlier, the pathogens are already growing before that temperature trigger, right? So we say that 55 for 3 to 5 days, that is the pathogen that enters into the optimal growth. But actually, before they enter into the optimal growth, there's activity there. So it wouldn't be a bad idea to treat them, and especially people are usually more worried about those stressful area, right? And that's where you have a longer those warmer hours throughout the years where you have more uncontrollable root diseases. So I would treat it when targeting those warmer areas.
Yeah. So that's the first, I think, answer, right, Frank, is okay. So we're maybe we'll stick a soil meat thermometer just in those areas. That's the way to do it. And we have a soil temp model and we show that every week on the show, right? But just stick something in those areas to confirm because they're probably warmer than what our model, which is going to be sort of the middle area is. So okay, that's sort of timing, right? And my next question, Ming-Yi, is I've seen Frank talk a lot about we need to get the fungicide down to the roots, and we've seen it from Arkansas and Wendell and those guys. What is more important? I think most people, when they have, okay, I got summer patch, I got take all, they go straight to this compendium. I got the 2024 version here, and I look at the efficacy and which product should I apply? Which one's got maximum efficacy? 4 out of 4, or in this case, 3.5. But we also have this water component, and in there, you guys suggest a carrier volume of 5 gallons per thousand, right? I doubt people are doing that.
Yeah.
And you got tenth of an inch to a little bit more. I've seen 1/4 of an inch, and Frank, you just showed it. Maybe you need an inch of water. Is it more important to get the fungicide, whether it's a 3 efficacy, 2 efficacy, 1.5 maybe? Is it more important to get it there, or is it more important to select the right fungicide? And I scramble and go to those efficacy things. Which one is sort of the governor of how much control I'm going to get?
I have to say both are very important. So you have the best fungicide ever, but you don't get it down to a root zone, it's not going to help you. You can have a mediocre fungicide, but if you get it down to the root zone, it will protect your plant. So I think both are equally important. And do both if you can, right? I know there's no one really doing 4 gallon or 5 gallon is a pain, right? Because you have to recalibrate, you have to use a different nozzle, and it goes really slow. If you're protecting your fairway, uh, it's gonna be really long days, probably not even in a day, right? So I understand that is really sometimes is not practically achievable, but post if you can do it a post application irrigation that will help you.
Yeah.
If you increase your tank rate, say from 1 gallon to 2 gallon, that will help you, right? If you can add in the wetting agent that is a penetrant that will help the fungicide to move down, that will help you as well. So all those little things, there may be some difficulties to do it the perfect way, but all those little things, if you improve a little bit on each of them, then it will all will help you.
Yeah, and I'll just add, while we, say we got to be careful about runoff because the soils are saturated, at the same time, a wetter soil to start with will receive the water better, right? So you've got a better chance of moving that material down when you do it. Now, I also want to add that the in addition to the fungicide, Ming-Yi, you would include in places where it's stressful, routine manganese sulfate applications. Yes.
Yeah, I will do it in the spring, when the roots are actively growing,
Yeah.
and they're actively absorbing nutrients around them.
Yeah.
And also, so that's going to be your shorter season. You don't want to do manganese sulfate in the middle of summer when it's like 85 and above,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, Carl, here's your engineering slide for the day.
Yeah, and so you just talked about it, Frank, runoff. Okay, I'm going to apply an inch of irrigation. In a lot of cases, the infiltration rates I'm showing here are much higher than that. But if I just put that all at one time, that's going to run off, right? And what I need is I need the water to get into the slope. And if we're talking about sloped areas like bunker banks, I need it to get in, but I can't put too much water in that it's running off, right? And that slide I showed there was pulled from some like river erosion work. But basically, the idea is once you get above 10 degrees of slope, you've lost 25% of your infiltration rate just because the water, because of gravity, says, I'm going to go on the surface. I don't need to go down. And when you think about bunker banks, man, a lot of those are over 10 degrees of slope. So, Ming-Yi, you talked about the different nozzles. You got to spray at different speeds. If I'm trying to get the water in there, are there certain application methods? Maybe the boomless nozzle that's throwing over. Should I put a half rate, spray it once, allow it to go in, and then spray it again? And then like a couple different cycles of low amounts of irrigation, hand water, drone. the application of this thing, like the execution of the application seems to be very important. Is there anything there that you found works better than sort of the traditional back the sprayer in, roll it back up deal?
Well, for this, I think you gotta be creative. I mean, the superintendents are usually very good at it. I mean, if you tell them the goals, they will be able to achieve it with all their magical toolbox, whatever they have in there. So I think if in this case, like a bunker bank, maybe a backpack sprayer, and then maybe under the condition when the soil is already wet enough, right, so that it will infiltrate better. I don't really have an answer because we've never run trial in this conditions, right? And I think it will be a really tough trial to run. So
Yeah. And these are these kinds of rolled bunker faces where you have the 90-degree angle grasses, and sand being blasted on them and difficult to irrigate, right? Because they're at 90-degree angles, especially with cool season grasses. So Carl, your point at the bottom is incredibly well taken. We're going to have to maybe think outside the box. And when we were at the National, he's got zoysia grass on all his banks, right out of Richie Spears' toolbox at Piping Rock. So, this is not something new, and maybe, not for Beth Page, probably for the Ryder Cup this fall. But as the climate keeps changing, we're going to have to thinking differently. And Ming-Yi, this is where you and Chase and Mike Hadley stumbled into this persistent problem that we then took samples to you. And you reminded us of an old study that looked at I don't think people always realize this or knew this. There's a palette of organisms, there's a collection of organisms, there's a community of organisms, whatever you want to call it, that contribute to what we call summer patch or take all patch, right? First off, let's talk about they are collections of organisms, right, that are out there, and the earliest work identified major ones, but there's other ones there. So let's talk just a little bit about what we know about the community that causes these root problems that are, let me flex a little bit here, ectotrophic root infecting fungi.
yeah, it's always a community. I mean, really, we used to think that all diseases are caused by it's one disease, one pathogen. It's really not a case in soil, at least, if not in the foliar as well. The past, I don't know, 10, 15 years, people start realizing this. At that time, we're basically lack of tool to study the community. But then there's so many great researchers like, Dr. Stevens, Kearns, Vines, Aaron talk with Dr. Tommaso Peterson, and Ning, of course, our great Rutgers researcher, Ning, and they've discovered so many causal agents, but a lot of time we're looking at one at a time. But the past 2 years, we studied more. We did a really comprehensive isolations for all the root disease samples that comes into to Rutgers. We examined them, every single of them. We spent 2 weeks isolate each samples, and we've done probably more than 50 samples by now. Now, our feeling is more than 35 to 40% of the sample actually had a community of pathogens, right? So it's not a single causal agent in a lot of the cases. Yeah, this slide you're showing is only showing 30 samples, but we have a lot more data now.
Great.
I mean, every day we have more data.
Okay.
Yeah.
So first off, there's a lot of now that we have new techniques, we're finding there's a lot of other pathogens. And you found on the black course that this Slopiomyces cylindrosporus was a major component of what we were observing that were causing these quote unquote summer patch, take all patch like symptoms. Okay. Now what you're telling us is, now that we can test these things, we're finding things different than Magnaporti or Gallmanomyces or, whatever we are calling them now. And that's all well and good, but here for our fastest 30 minutes, Ming-Yi, is the question. Does any of this matter in the sense for control? In other words, this is great we found these things. Do I have to adjust those triggers that we've spent a long time establishing? Do I have to adjust those? And how do I even, should I start looking for these different pathogens and then determine when to spray? I know there's a lot to unpack there, but I got rid of the slide so we can just look at each other and talk about it. Let's start with the simple thing. Is your ability to detect a wider range of potential causal organisms potentially going to change the way we treat?
Oh, definitely. So let's start with just a really simple one. So the black horse, actually, that is a single organism because we found it's straight just Slopomyces indosporus. All right, and that's easy because you can figure out the optimal growth temperature for that one pathogen, and you spray according to that. But in other cases, when you have a community, and some likes lower temperature, some likes higher temperature, like in a few samples we got last year, we have Megnopodiapsis cynodontis, which is a root rot causing agent. So in that case, you might have to start off, if you have other traditional take-hole patch pathogen in there, you have to start off your program early, like 55, but then you have to spray all the way up to control, like a program that controls take-hole root rot. So when your soil is at 60, 65, 70, you're still gonna have to spray to control that if that's there, if that's causing you a problem. So the community actually matters. If you know your community, you will know ahead of time how to design your root disease control program.
Okay. One simple question. This is perfect. One simple question, and then Carl, I'll ask you. I'm sure you got a question or two, maybe, and we're over the time, but I think this is worth it. Okay, timing might be different. Do many of the products still work effectively when delivered to this collection or community, whether it's a take-all or a summer patch organism? Do the products that are generally efficacious for those still efficacious even if you only have this Slopomyces sort of thing?
Yes, for my understanding, we've tested only 4 or 5 different cool season root pathogens. The products are fairly consistent. I mean, in terms of the class, right? So if we're talking about the class, so the DMI and QI are still controlling the best.
Okay. Good. Okay.
But I mean, there would be difference between each active ingredients for each pathogen. But in general, I'd say the class are fairly consistent.
So timing might be different, but products might be the same, might be different. Carl, what do you want to ask? I got 5,000 questions to go.
I basically got to where I wanted to, Frank, which was, man, it's really, especially on these bunker banks where you have the slopes, you have south facing, north facing, sort of like, can we design an infrastructure that's just easier to manage this in? And I thought I was going to get a nice Rossi rant there on the architects, and you gave it to us earlier in the year, so we didn't want to renovate it. But I think that's sort of my overall point, is like, this is not an easy thing to control. And I mean, you just laid it out. When we've got communities, you need a 55 trigger, probably a 65 trigger, and those are going to happen, a couple of days or weeks apart. And it's hard to simplify this down to, one of the tenets I talk about, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. And it's hard to do that here. And that's really a tough thing for superintendents to implement when it's hard to execute the spray and to time it all up. It's just not a conducive situation. And I think the bunker banks and how they design them, the architects, puts us in that spot.
Yeah. And so if you've got, so that's one thing where the plants are under stress. If you're having chronic problems with summer patch and you think you've got your timing dialed in and you think you generally have had good success with products and now they're not working, my advice is to grab a sample and send it to Rich and Ming-Yi at Rutgers to try to get some sense of this. And Ming-Yi, we're going to have you on again because in our travels, you mentioned you can actually detect pathogen load from grass clippings now.
Yes. Yes, that's the assay we're developing. I mean, it's new. We're using newer technology, but the idea wasn't new, right?
Yeah.
There'd be people laying down the foundation, and I'm building on top of that.
Perfect.
So,
Well, glad to have you, Ming-Yi. Good to spend the time with you. We had a lovely dinner along a river in Riverhead, Carl. And so we'll see you next week.
yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
thanks everyone.
See
Thanks
ya,
so
Yeah,
much,
thanks,
Ming-Yi.
Frank. Thanks,
Thank
Carl.
you,
Thanks,
guys.
everybody. Yep.
See you guys.
This has been a production of Cornell University. On the web at cornell.edu.